Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome all. Hi. We're here tonight with Honorable Justice Alan Page. We're going to have a lively discussion about diversity, equity, inclusion, and the law. It's going to be an interactive forum. We're going to be taking questions from the audience later in the program. I wanted to introduce our district governor, Lloyd Campbell. He'll be giving some opening remarks.
Okay. Now that's the way you introduce a district governor. Thank you very, very much. I love that. I'm Lloyd Campbell. I'm the district governor for 5950. And it's interesting when this whole thing evolved, and this is probably the brainchild of a couple people here. One of the things that they've taught me in my DG school is not to call people names because sometimes they get embarrassed. But one of the things that I want to talk about here is they asked me to talk about DEI and what it means to me. It's, in a sense, emotional for me, in a sense that without the DEI, I wouldn't be here today. Without the concept of DEI, half of this room wouldn't be here today. Last night, about 2 a.m., I'm in bed and I'm saying, oh, this is an event that's happening today. What's the agenda? What do I need to talk about? What should be going on? So I reached for my phone, text Andrew and said, what the blank should I be doing today? And he, believe it or not, at 2 a.m., he texted me back. He said, talk about what DEI means to you and also to Rotary. It's interesting when you talk about DEI to Rotary, diversity is part of our core values. It's been around for over 100 years in Rotary. So you ask yourself, why does it appear to be so difficult to achieve that? We are great sometimes at the academic part of things. We know what's right, and we also know what's wrong. And sometimes the problem is, how do we implement those things? And when I received that early morning text and it says, talk about DEI and how it affects you, I thought about all the intersections that DEI affected me and where we are here today. You see, I was raised in Arkansas. Has anyone had the opportunity to travel to Arkansas other than my wife? Because she's not going to raise her hand. She does not even want to go back to Arkansas. I was born and raised in an all-Black town. Now that's interesting in the sense that there's some good things about it and there's some bad things about it. The good things about it, I was raised during the Civil Rights Movement. And my parents really looked at me and said, we need to protect this child. Not because of just me walking the street and being whatever, but the idea that I was extremely active in the things that I wanted to do. I asked a lot of questions, and sometimes those questions made people uncomfortable. And sometimes some of those uncomfortable feelings ran me off the road. Some of those uncomfortable feelings left messages in my locker. Some of those uncomfortable feelings, when my parents talk about the day they brought me home, my father saw his best friend lynched. We don't talk about those things in my family that often. But that town sort of protected me in the sense that all the things that could have happened to me didn't happen to me. But the flip side of that is when you in a community where it's all Black or all white, we seem to create scenarios and stories that may or may not be true. We create an environment that sometimes is not real. We think of sometimes Black people as boogeyman. I'm sorry, white people as boogeymen. We think sometimes white people as the devil. And these were some of the things that were actually taught in my town. One of the things that made a difference is that, thank goodness, we were desegregated. We had the opportunity to mix. And naive me thought that putting someone in an environment and seeing that I'm just as bright, I'm just as intelligent, I'm just as good as anyone else, and I work just as hard would make a difference. But over time, what we realize, there's been gaps. There are structural things that's going on that prevented a lot of people from being to achieve some of the things that they were capable of doing. If you had the opportunity to attend some of our Federal Reserve conversations, we've had two, they talked about some of the structural things that prohibits certain people from achieving their goal without them even knowing it. That's unacceptable. One of the things that you will notice when you just step back for a second, there are gaps. And one of the major gaps that we have is in education. How long do I have to talk? is in education. I was lucky enough to have a mother that was a teacher. And she understood the importance of education. In so much that we lived only a few miles from Memphis, Tennessee. And even though we weren't rich, my parents sent me to a private preschool and kindergarten. Made such a difference in my life. When I was at a young age, I had friends that was just as bright, just as smart as I was, but when they started school, something went sideways. There was a gap in their education, a gap in their opportunity to be successful in life. So that was one of the first crossroads for DEI for me. The idea first that we need to be involved. We need to see the truth in individuals. We cannot live in an environment where it's all Black or all white, because what happens, it creates an environment where one of those structures can create gaps. They can create a system where you will not be successful. And we need to make sure that does not happen. We're stronger together as human beings than we are creating separate silos throughout our history, throughout the things that we do. This year, Rotary's initiative was DEI, and I was extremely happy with that. We are making, when most people think of Rotary, they think of it as a all male, white, old man's organization. What they fail to see is that Rotary is in transition. And I'm part of that transition. You're part of that transition. We want to make a difference in the world. And the things that we're talking about today, and the questions you asked today, are the foundations to make that difference. But we cannot just sit here and just talk about it. We actually need to implement the things that we said that should be done. One of the things that we're doing in our district is, and with the corporation of 5960, is letting people know what Rotary is truly all about. And also we're looking at a signature project where we are trying to fund preschool education in the state of Minnesota. You'll hear more about that later. That was a plug that maybe I shouldn't have said, but anyway, I'm gonna let you know. But DEI is playing an important role in the way this country is going to go. We're either going to decide to stay in our separate silos and be something that we're not, when we think about how this country was started as a melting pot, and now we seem to be separate silos, that can't happen. Even Paul Harris, who the founder of Rotary, said that for us to be successful, we had to be diverse. It's a must because it gives us an opportunity for an exchange of ideas. It gives an opportunity for us to grow. These are the first steps that we're taking here today, an opportunity to take those first steps, to grow. And I'm honored to be here among such great company that can provide a gateway for those first steps so that we can grow, so we can be better than an individual, but be something that our forefathers, the people in our country really wants us to be. Can you imagine, and that's the theme of Rotary this year, what this country could be if we broke down all those barriers of sex, race, color, and worked together to achieve what we can really, our potential could really be. One last statement, and I'm giving the mic because I feel the eyes in the back of my head here. Oh, I'm sorry. And my wife, she's saying, okay, they're not gonna have a chance to talk. I've always been, and this is a little off subject, I've always been a fan of Star Trek. And the reason for that, in that world that Roddenberry put together, is that everyone is equal. And they were able to achieve things just outstanding. I don't know how I could get to Star Trek into this conversation, but I'm going to pass this on to one of the things I want you to remember about Rotary is we talk about our 4 key things, but one of the things we always do is have fun. So let's always think, oh, there's my wife doing it again. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Andrew Ramirez, and I am part of the Minnesota Pride Rotary Club, a founding member. I'm also the chair of Rotary District 5950 Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Action Team, and that is the venue that is sponsoring our event tonight. For me, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, representation is important. As a gay man and the son of a first-generation Mexican immigrant, representation is important. As Lloyd said, historically, Rotary has been very much a male organization, very white. And my Rotary story is different. I have found friends and fellowship in Rotary that I've never felt this kind of belonging in any group I've been part of. I think with Rotary, my story is about inclusivity and being asked to be part of the leadership team in the district. And through chairing Tom Gump's district conference, I was included and started to form relationships with people in our district. And it's through that allyship that we were able to start the Minnesota Pride Rotary Club in this district, one of the first LGBT ally Rotary clubs in the world. And that is a proud accomplishment for our district. And we should be striving to include everybody in Rotary so that everybody feels welcome. And I believe that's how we'll continue to grow, when people feel comfortable in Rotary. I have the privilege to introduce 2 very distinguished speakers tonight. We have the Honorable Justice Alan Page. Give him a hand. We are in the presence of a living legend here. Justice Page was born in 1945 in Canton, Ohio. He was 8 years old when Brown versus Board of Education was handed down, a decision that finally integrated public schools in the United States. He attended undergraduate at University of Notre Dame and played football, where he was a national champion. After that, he went on to a very illustrious career with the Purple People Eaters for the Minnesota Vikings. One of the greatest defensive lines in the history of the NFL. Alan Page was the first person to ever receive the MVP award in the NFL as a defensive tackle. And his story doesn't stop there. After an illustrious career in professional football, he went on to law school at the University of Minnesota. Go Gophers. Then on to a career in private practice law. He joined the Minnesota Attorney General's office and served the public. In 1992, he was the first African-American appointed to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Him and his wife, Diane, started the Page Education Foundation. Over the years, they have endowed $16 million worth of scholarships to students of color.
Yeah.
And he encourages those students of color to then mentor younger students of color on the values of education so that they can then pursue higher education, because education is freedom, as Justice Page says. Justice Page has earned 12 honorary degrees from colleges and universities. And he's been bestowed the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor you can earn in this country, reserved for the most distinguished Americans for their meritorious service to the values of the United States of America. It doesn't stop there. He's had 2 schools named after him here in Minnesota. And he's continuing to work tirelessly for the advancement of education here in our great state of Minnesota. We're blessed and grateful to have such a distinguished American here in our presence tonight. We also have Mr. Doug Schmidt. He is a remarkable litigator. He went to Iowa State for his law degree. He's very active.
No, Iowa. University, Hawkeye.
He went to law school somewhere in Iowa. He's a named partner at Schmidt Salita Law Firm here in Minnetonka. He is the founder of the West Metro Legal Continuing Education Consortium and has provided over 120 hours of continuing education and specifically anti-bias training. I'd also like to acknowledge that we've got over 80 people on Zoom who are also in this audience from around the world who weren't here today with us. And now I'd like to thank our event sponsors. This event wouldn't have been able to be possible without the generous sponsorship of Rotary District 5950, Rotary District 5960, the Minnesota Pride Rotary Club, Schmidt Salita Law Firm, and then all of our very generous VIP donors. The Page Education Scholarships support students pursuing higher education at any Minnesota accredited university, community college, or technical college. Each student is endowed between $1,500 and $2,500, and those scholarships are renewable. And I'm proud to say that through the generosity of everybody here tonight, we will be endowing 2 Page scholars. So now I'm going to turn it over to Doug Schmidt, who will be leading a question and answer with Honorable Justice Alan Page.
Well, first of all, I want to welcome all of you folks that are joining us tonight on Zoom. Many of the members of my West Metro CLE will be joining in, as well as other Rotarians and members of the public. And thank you so much, Justice Page, for coming and honoring us tonight with your presence.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your support of the Page Education Foundation.
Your lifetime achievements are just absolutely beyond my comprehension. So amazing. Are we hearing it right that you graduated from law school while you were still playing professional football?
That's correct. But I'm not the first one, and I'm not the last one.
I thought it was pretty tough in law school to have a part-time job on the side. I can't imagine that. Tell us
Well,
about that.
it's a little like having a part-time job on the side.
Well, and
Back when I was in law school, professional football for the players wasn't the all-consuming thing that it had become. I was able to go to school basically full-time once I figured out, what school was all about. And able to take classes that fit what I needed to have at times that I could take them. And so it worked out pretty well.
I have, in preparation for tonight, reviewed a number of tapes of interviews that have been conducted before. And I was fascinated by the story of your first trial at Mitchell Law School. Would you share that with our audience?
Well, I am a law school graduate. I'm also a law school dropout. I enrolled at William Mitchell College of Law in the summer of 1968. 1 year into professional football. I had a wife and a daughter, and unfortunately, I wasn't as focused or as committed as I could have been or should have been. And I got there in the first, well, even before I got there, they give you these assignments, 500 pages of this and 500 pages of that. And that was something a little different from my undergraduate experience. But I read what I could, and we get into the class and they start down the road of the Socratic method. And that was completely different than anything I'd ever experienced before.
They didn't teach you back in Canton,
They
Ohio.
didn't teach that, not to me. And I was really lost. I mean, I was absolutely lost. I was so lost that I figured that I wasn't going to survive within 2 or 3 days. And it took me another 2.5 weeks to figure out how to drop out. That's how far underwater I was. And my thinking was that, I'm the dummy in this class. Because I don't understand what's going on. This is all foreign. They could just as well have been speaking Greek. What I didn't understand was I wasn't the only one that didn't understand what was going on. Nobody understood. It was all there. It was all a new experience pretty much for everybody. And eventually, after dropping out in 1968 and continuing my football career, I decided to go back to law school in 1975 with the commitment to do what it took to graduate. And more importantly than to graduate, to learn and understand what the law was all about. And so 1975, I enrolled at the University of Minnesota. Took my first coursework at the University of Texas at Austin in the summer of 1975. For those of you who are lawyers in the audience, I took contracts and procedure, 13 weeks from start to finish.
Wow.
And funny thing happened on the way to into that 13 weeks. I actually got it. And from there, I took a light load the fall of 1975, full load winter and spring, little heavier load in summer, did work in the summers. In the fall of 76, took a little heavier load. And by the fall of 77, I was taking a full load and graduated in May of or June of 78.
But we lost you to Chicago Bears. And I understand that you you were actually practicing law at Lindquist and Benham Law Firm while you were playing the Chicago Bears. You didn't give up.
Well, for me, well, first of all, I'm a bit of an odd duck. I loved law school, and I love the experience. And as a professional football player back then, nobody was making enough money to last them a lifetime. So it was about preparing for the future. That coupled with the fact that I probably played longer than I wanted to. And so law school, practicing law, gave me the opportunity to finally start doing something about preparation for that future.
How old were you when you decided you might want to be a lawyer?
Well, when I first thought about it, I was 7, 8 years old. I was at that age when, we ask little kids what they want to do when they grow up. And growing up in Canton, Ohio, a place where if things went well for me, I might be able to, and typically, I might be able to get a job in a steel mill.
Wow.
And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with working in steel mills, but I have always had the self-awareness to understand that steel mills are dirty, they're dangerous, and the work is repetitious. And I've never been real good with dangerous and repetitious.
Yeah, right.
Particularly
up against 300-pounders.
particularly with respect to repetitious. I just
But that would
couldn't cope with it. That coupled with the fact that it's, the 8-year-old mind works. I didn't know any lawyers, but I had heard stories about how lawyers made lots of money, drove big fancy cars, and didn't work too hard. Now, in the 8-year-old mind, dirty, dangerous, and repetitious versus big fancy cars, lots of money, and not working too hard, you go to big fancy cars, not working too hard every time. Also, as was mentioned, in 1954, I was 8 years old. United States Supreme Court decided Brown versus the Board of Education. Even at that young age, I understood that the ground had shifted, that the law had power and that the law could improve people's lives. And that was something that interested me. I mean, Brown was life altering. And it led me to believe in equal justice under the law, that the law is about solving problems and helping people. And so when people would ask me what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Do you remember the the Central High School 7 out of Arkansas when Governor Orville Faubus brought the National Guard in
1957,
57?
12
Were you
years.
watching that?
Of course,
And
because while I was in Ohio, and Ohio was not subject to state-sponsored segregation, like many other parts of the country, it had clear implications for me as a human being. And so certainly I was watching. My experience is that from the day I was old enough to understand that because the color of my skin was what it was, that somehow I was the other. From my first understanding of things. And that is something that you don't get away from. And you understand the implications of that. And so, yeah, from the beginning of my sort of understanding as a human being, that's been there. And something that has had an impact and an influence.
so who were your role models when you were 8 and 10 and 12 and 14 years old?
Well, the reality is that we're influenced by those we can reach out and touch. We can talk about athletic heroes, and we can talk about movie star heroes and role models, but it's really people we can reach out and touch. And for me, it was my parents and other family members.
You lost your mother when you were 13.
When I was 13, that was devastating.
So tell me, we've heard a list of accomplishments that are mind-boggling to me. Which of them that you look back on are you most proud of and are most dear and near to you?
Well, hopefully that's out on the horizon somewhere.
Okay, still yet to encounter.
I've never been one to spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, patting myself on the back, being happy with what I've done. For me, and some of this maybe comes from my athletic career, it's not what have you done for me, it's what have you done for me lately. Well, in that regard, what have I accomplished lately?
I mentioned that I've reviewed some of the prior interviews, and in one of them, you remarked about how the naming of the Justice Allen Page Middle School from the Alexander Ramsey Middle School name was, at least that night in that interview, very important to you. Can you comment on that?
Well, I have received a lot of honors and recognition along the way. In the grand scheme of all those good things that have happened to me, the naming of Justice Page Middle School, and now the naming of Justice Allen Page Elementary School. Those are singular honors, but particularly with the middle school, because that was a student-led effort. That was an effort grounded in what those students saw as injustice and seeking justice. You know, they didn't name the school Allen Page Middle School. It was Justice Page Middle School. And for those students to seek justice in the way that they did. I mean, and I'm the beneficiary of that. How could it not be one of the highest honors that one could have?
So while we're on the subject, within the last year, another school then has been named after you in Woodbury. And
Maplewood.
okay.
Maplewood.
Maplewood, sorry. And I just finished reading an article about how you were there the first day of school to read books to the kindergartners on the grass. Is that true?
I was fortunate enough to be able to be there to greet the kindergartners for their very first day of school.
And it was reported.
Let me tell you, it doesn't get any better.
And you and your daughter Cammie have written 4 children's books,
Yes,
and they're all available online at your foundation.
page-ed.org.
Okay. And the article said, reported that you have committed yourself to coming back to that school on a regular basis and participating in reading to the children.
Well, I mean, what's the point of having your name on the building if you can't go to school, right? You know, it's interesting. The night that the Minneapolis School Board approved the name change for Justice Page Middle School was the night before the last day of school in 2017. The morning of the last day of school, Diane and I were at Justice Page Middle School.
Wow.
Greeting the students, thanking them, and being a part of that community. And it was important to me to be there. It was important for Diane to be there. And might I just say, all these things you've heard about me, all the success and all the good fortune, none of that would have been possible without Diane. She was and continues to be my partner. We used to have a saying that we're a team. Couldn't ever possibly have a better teammate.
Wow.
And she's as responsible as I am for all these good things. Particularly responsible for the success of the Page Education Foundation. Because while I was on the court, while I could do some things with the foundation, I was not permitted and couldn't do any fundraising. And she did all of that. And she was, in essence, overseeing everything that was going on while she had a full-time job of her own. She was a marketing research consultant. She did qualitative marketing research, which entailed travel and lots of other stuff. But through it all, she has been there and been here.
I had it on my list to ask you, when we lost you to the Chicago Bears for all those years, what brought you back to Minnesota, to us in Minnesota? I think you've just answered that.
Well, we actually moved as a family. We would spend 6 months of the year there. The kids would go to school there, and we would come back here and spend 6 months here. And when it was finally done playing, her career was here. And I wasn't really in the hurry to take another bar exam. So I thought I'd come back here, finish, work here until we got reciprocity and I could then go back to.
Oh, no, we didn't hear that.
Well, and I should tell you, I learned to be a lawyer at Lindquist and Venom and I was taught by some really good people. But for me, the business of being in the law, the business of the law was not my idea of a good time. And I had the opportunity to join the Illinois Attorney General's office in 1984. And we talked about it as a family. And Diane said, you can go if you want. I'm not going. You can commute. So that was the end of that discussion.
So I've read that the not Woodbury,
Maplewood.
the Maplewood School is actively involved in the Freedom Schools movement. Would you tell us about that?
Well, the Justice Allen Page Elementary is a brand new school building. I mean, literally, they finished construction. They finished the final construction. And they may be still doing some of it even as we speak, but it opened up in September. And over the summer, they opened it up to the Freedom School movement. And I had the good fortune to be able to participate at the Freedom School on their last day of school. And what I saw made me hopeful as usual.
Last day of school, have they discontinued it?
Well, it's a summer, at least for Justice Allen Page Elementary. It was a summer program.
I read that it's a program to provide comprehensive, culturally relevant summer and after school enrichment to children in high poverty areas. Does that sum it up?
That sums it up.
Designed to help children fall in love with reading, increase self-esteem, generate more positive attitudes towards learning.
Well, if you teach kids to read and to love reading, by the mere operation of the process of reading, they're going to learn to think. And if they learn to think, they can do whatever they want to do.
Wow. So I'm going to switch the subject to your experience with the Minnesota Supreme Court. If my math is right, Minnesota became a state in 1857.
Yep.
And you were appointed to the court in 1980.
I was.
Yep.
I was a elected,
Elected, that's right.
not appointed.
That's right. You ran for office.
And the election was in November of 1992,
92.
and I joined the court January 4th, 1993.
Now, I think that means that the state where you were the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court.
Yes,
So it took us 120 years to get that done.
136.
36. My math is wrong.
And mine could be off by a year or two, but it's close to 136.
Well, I learned my math in Iowa. So, at any rate, Justice Rosalie Wall was the first female justice of the Supreme Court in 1977.
Yes,
So it took us over 100 years to get that done.
we excluded half the population, maybe a little more than half the population from our decision-making process.
And since then, you've mentioned earlier tonight that we've had some wonderful, wonderful women justices of the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Absolutely. People would ask me, it's interesting, when I first joined the court had a majority of women. I think maybe the first one in the nation,
Really?
one of the first few in the nation for sure. And they would ask me what it was like to serve on a court that was a majority of women. And I'd sort of try to, well, my whole experience has been on a court with a majority of women.
At home?
No, at the court. And it's like, this is all I know. What is there something other than that nobody else is doing it? Is there something odd or different about this? We were very fortunate to, you talk about diversity. Women have different experiences than men. And those experiences need to be accounted for in our judicial system. We can't have, well, let me put it to you this way. You wouldn't want 7 Allen Pages to serve on the Supreme Court at the same time. Because first of all, none of us has a monopoly on the right answers. I can only make decisions based on my experience, but I haven't had every experience. And so the more experiences you can have, the more diverse the views are, the richer the decisions will be. And the more, quite frankly, the more just the decisions will be. And if we are about justice and equal justice, then we have to have a system that is enriched by the views of as many people as we can. And to exclude people of color, to exclude women, to exclude anybody, it limits us.
I'm going to switch the subject to your Allen Page Foundation. We've heard just a scratch of information about it. I read that the mission statement is to encourage Minnesota's youth of color to pursue post-secondary education. 35 years, $16 million now, to 7,500 Page scholars.
No, actually, we haven't revised those numbers lately, but it's probably closer to 8,500 paid scholars, approaching 9,000. And we're probably closer to 17 million than 16 million at this stage. Our goal is to, as you noted, encourage, motivate, and assist young men and women of color. Minnesota's young men and women of color in the pursuit of post-secondary education. Our goal is to pull people along, not filter them out. So our scholars, we call them paid scholars, our grant recipients. They go to 104, they've gone to 104 different post-secondary academic institutions and programs across the state over the last 35 years. University of Minnesota, Hennepin Vo-Tech, St. Paul Vo-Tech, Carleton College, St. John's, St. Benedict's, you name it, they go. Our view is that as long as a school will or a program will take you, we will consider you for funding. Our grants are renewable, contingent on, we have a second requirement. This is actually more important than the money we give. We require our scholars in real time while they're going to school to serve young children kindergarten through 8th grade, specifically in the area of education. And so long as the scholars do their service and the school continues to accept them, we will continue to fund them. We've had scholars, in 2-year programs. We've had scholars who have received their PhD. We've had scholars who are lawyers, doctors, nurses, you name it, our scholars are everywhere. And, they are the ones who do the real work because they are working with young children, sending that strong, clear message that education is a tool that can be used to achieve whatever your hopes and dreams are. They do it by word and by deed. And I happen to think that if we can motivate young children in ways that they can see what's in it for them in terms of education, we can begin to solve some of these challenges we have with poor children and with children of color. Education is a tool that gives you power. But if you don't understand that, there is a tendency to lose hope. And indeed, many of the young people that I saw while I was on the court who came through our juvenile justice system, certainly there were those who had no moral compass, but for the vast majority of them, they'd simply lost hope. And when you lose hope, you're pretty much free to do whatever you want. Our goal is to create that hope and in the process change the future. Not just for our scholars, not just for the young people they work with, but for the communities we live in, this state, this nation.
I've seen the figure that your scholars have given back over 490,000 hours to over 60,000 Minnesota children in over 550 schools. Can that be right?
Probably a little low.
So, tell me, please, you have worked with the Federal Reserve, with Neil Kashari. They've done a number of studies about the importance of education to our economy. Earlier tonight, you and I discussed the effect, the negative effect on the economy of lack of education in the lower end of our educational spectrum. Could you share those comments with us?
Well, we'll now see if I can be consistent here. The fact is, well, for openers, the Fed has two main responsibilities. One is the economy, the other is full employment. And if you're leaving a large segment of children behind educationally, that has implications for full employment. And I don't have, it's been a while since I've seen the numbers, but on average, white students are 60 to 70% proficient at grade level in reading and math. Students of color are some 20 to 30 percentage points below that. Poor white children are below those numbers, that 60 to 70% also. Indeed, there was a study done recently by the state's legislative auditor, which showed that for, I think it was, I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2020, it might have been 2020. 42%. 42% of children across the state of Minnesota, might have been either eighth graders or fourth graders, but 42% were proficient at grade level. That is unsustainable for any economy, I think.
And a significant percentage of them not considered college ready on graduation.
Well, that's 42% overall. Students of color were on average 15 to 20 percentage points lower. We cannot afford, either morally or economically, the luxury of allowing that to continue to happen.
The Kinsey report, back up a second. Let me preface my next question about diversity. We've talked in terms of wealth and economy. We've talked in terms of race. We also have a diversity issue that my eyes have been open to as a member of the diversity committee of prejudice or diversity of people with physical and mental and psychological disabilities. The McKinsey report projected that the US GDP could add $25 billion by bringing full employment to disabled workers. Do you have a comment on that?
My only comment would be it really is stating the obvious,
Yeah,
and having stated the obvious, why is it that we continue to do what we do? And I can't remember what the numbers were, but in terms of leaving people of color behind, it's something like a $200 billion, 200 billion with a B impact on the economy.
wow.
I mean, excuse me, we're worried about economic growth, and we just sort of are merrily go along, leaving 200 billion and add in those who are disabled. So 225 billion, $250 billion on the table. What kind of sense does that make? I dare say none. But yet here we are. You know, quite frankly, I've never understood that kind of thinking. I can remember as a young kid growing up in the segregated world that we had, and reading, you know, understanding that if you were Black and lived in the South, you couldn't eat at the lunch counter. You couldn't drink the water. You had to at your separate water fountain, even though at the end of the day, the water is all the same. And I used to wonder, how do these businesses that are presumably in it to make money, how do you, what sense does it make to exclude paying customers? You know, we don't serve Blacks here. Excuse me, you're doing so well that you can afford to turn business away? What kind of sense does that make? I dare say none.
Before I move into the next line of questioning, we wanted to make this interactive. Dean has some note cards to pass through the crowd and some pens, and ask you, offer you the opportunity to write down questions that we can pose to Justice Page. If you would raise your hand, I see Dean is off here to the side. And we'll continue on with the questioning of it in a little bit. We'll start answering some of those questions. Just raise your hand if you're looking for a card. So, Justice Page, we've got a critical race theory issue going on in our society. And
Whatever that is.
that's exactly. Do you think that it is shameful for us to teach the facts of slavery and what actually happened in the Jim Crow era and the race riots of 1919 and a community of 10,000 wiped out in Tulsa, and even our lynching here in Duluth? Can you comment on that?
Where do I begin? if you're going to teach history, it seems to me that you have to teach history. And even though the facts of that history may be unpleasant, embarrassing, painful, if we are going to teach history, we have to teach history. And if you're not going to, teach and have people learn about what happened, if you're going to teach something other than what actually happened, I'm not sure what the point is. We can learn from our past if we know what that past is. We cannot learn from it if we don't. And if the concern is that, well, it may be upsetting, it seems to me that it is what it is. And we have to be honest about who we are and how we got to where we are today. Because in my sense is that a lot of what we see today in terms of race is a function of the present effects of what happened in the past. And if we are ever to overcome those present effects, we have to know what happened, and from there unbind ourselves from that past. Right now, and I think when I think about the law, in many respects, it perpetuates what took place after Reconstruction. Because while we've amended the Constitution to allow voting, to end slavery, to entitle everyone to due process and equal protection. The way the road we went down after Reconstruction, we are still bound up in it. We've changed the words and we've changed some of the conduct, but we haven't unbound ourselves from it. And I think if we're going to ever overcome it, we have to figure out how to unbind ourselves. And, you know, part of that is, I mean, that's sort of a systemic question. We have to, these things we have to do systemically, but there are some things that individually we have to do also. We have to stop segregating ourselves in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our communities. We have the power to do that. Not somebody else. It's you and me. We have the power to do that. We have to stop we have to stop treating people who are different from us as the other. We have to stop we have to walk away from the stereotypes that we perceive. That is not to suggest that we have to like everybody. I mean, we're all different, but different doesn't mean inferior, and it doesn't necessarily mean bad. We have to start judging people on what they do as opposed to some preconceived notion of who they are. And when I think about it, Martin Luther King Jr., when he said, we have to judge people on the content of their character, we actually have to start doing that. Otherwise, we're sunk.
Do you think the educational disparity plays into that problem?
Oh, absolutely.
Talk about that, please.
Well, by its nature, those disparities feed the stereotype. They absolutely feed the stereotype. And until we, now, mind you, I'm not an educator, but until we start educating individual children so that each child gets what he or she needs to help that child advance, you know, we're going to continue to have the same educational problems that we've had for the last, certainly since I've been around.
That's a good question. So there's, do you think we got some political animosity going on in our country today? Huh?
Now that's a leading question.
So what's the solution to that? What's the page solution, if any, to that?
Well, the question is, are we willing to set aside our biases? And if we're not willing to set aside our biases, you just continue to merrily go along down the road we're going down right now. And otherwise, we have to start treating people for who they are and what they do. And again, you don't have to like everybody. I mean, I use the analogy to ice cream. I like any kind of ice cream there is, as long as it's vanilla. But, you know, so we can dislike characteristics and qualities that people have, but we have to treat people individually and not just based on what we think they're going to do. And from a political standpoint, I mean, I just think it's what the path we're on right now is suicide. Indeed, again, Martin Luther King Jr., I think in 1955 or 56, in a sermon that he gave in, I think it was Birmingham, he said something to the effect that we have to learn to live together as a people. He said it used to be called moral failure. But on the path we're on, it's going to lead to universal suicide. And the question is, do we have the will to figure out how to get along? Politics aside.
We got some great questions here. Get yourself ready.
Okay.
What-
We haven't had any great ones so far. Is that what you're saying?
No. What was one of the most difficult situations morally that you had to deal with, court decision or otherwise, while at the Minnesota Supreme Court?
You know, the decisions at the court, I don't know that any of them were difficult morally. You know, as a judge, our obligation is to uphold the Constitution of the state of Minnesota. The role of the judge is to exercise one's judgment, not impose one's will. And if you understand that, even though the law takes you to some place where you don't want to go, that if you were, you know, if you had the magic wand, you wouldn't go there, you'd go someplace else. But if you understand your role and your responsibility and your oath, it's not hard to make decisions with which you otherwise might disagree. And I mean, and trust me, there were times when that happened. I can remember one case that we had involved the rape and murder of a young woman. And at trial, the prosecution engaged in multiple acts of prosecutorial misconduct. Because of that conduct, we were faced with the choice of requiring a new trial or putting blinders on and allowing the conviction to stand. If we were going to uphold our oath, we were required to grant the defendant a new trial, even though there was no question in anybody's mind that the defendant was guilty. And with a new trial, you run the risk of him being acquitted and back on the streets able to do it again. But if our system of justice is going to work, we had to grant him a new trial, and we did.
My first day of criminal law, the professor asked, is it worse to convict one innocent person and let 9 guilty people go, Or where is that balance? Did
As-
you get that question?
I don't recall getting that question, but my understanding of what our law is grounded in, it's grounded in fairness, equal justice, and it's grounded in the notion that in order to protect the innocent, we have to protect the rights of the guilty. Because if we don't, it's a slippery slope to, well, he's innocent, but, or she's innocent, but.
Got a great one here. What would you tell 8-year-old Alan Pages to encourage them to make the world a better place today?
I would say, be kind, be fair, treat people with respect, respect yourself, tell the truth, be honest. You know, this whole thing that we have when we talk about alternative facts. If we can't trust one another, and we can't trust one another if we aren't honest and truthful with one another, because truth is linked to trust, and because without trust we have nothing. I mean, if we don't trust one another, there is no reason to not take matters into your own hands in ways that none of us would like under every circumstances. The fabric that holds us together is trust. And if you don't have trust, you don't have anything. And so those are generally, I guess the last thing I would say to that 8-year-old is take what you do very seriously, seek excellence in doing it, but don't take yourself too seriously.
Wow, hang on. Much of the conversation this evening has been about the students, the student scholars. Justice Page, would you please comment on our teachers? Teacher recruitment, teacher quality, teacher pay, the volume of what teachers are expected to do, the devaluing of the profession, the attack on the teachers. To educate our students, we need great teachers. What do we do to solve this?
Well, my experience, and I spend a lot of time in schools and classrooms. I have for the last 50 years. And when you spend time in schools and classrooms, you get to see teachers at work. Teachers are, I would say, the most important people in our society. We trust them with our children and the development of our children. And over the last 15 to 20 years, somehow we have made teachers out to be the enemy. I don't understand that. I think it's dangerous. And I think on average, the teachers that we have are phenomenal.
You talked about what is near and dear to you earlier tonight is in your future. So here's the next question. Will you share with us your bucket list? Good questions out there, folks.
I don't have a bucket list per se. I've been, along with Neil Kashkari from the Federal Reserve, been working on amending Minnesota's Constitution to guarantee a quality public education to every student. If there's a bucket list, that's on it. Giving the citizens, the voters of this state, the opportunity to decide for themselves whether or not children should have that right. What else there might be on that list? You know, it's important for me to be able to get up and walk every day. I go for a walk every morning. I used to run. I've graduated to walking, but it's important to get out in the fresh air and to enjoy. And I guess for the time being, those are the things that move me along every day.
Everybody, thank you so much